If you observe, in a lot of spiritual teachings and in from the words of a lot of spiritual gurus, the approach to spirituality is that the mind is this trickster that likes to flood itself with a lot of thoughts, and that we should just simply shun away those thoughts and not think about them all that much. And in doing so, we avoid the labor of real thinking. But the problem is that reality is not so simplistic. It's actually immensely complex. And for millennia, we've been trying to ground this reality into something. But it's been a thorny philosophical debate as to where do you actually ground it in? Is it atoms and molecules? Is it living and non living things? Is it energy? Is it information? What is the ground that reality has? So today I would like to introduce you to this ground, but it's not really a ground as much, which we will allude to at the very end of the episode. It's more um, somewhat of a preamble, and that is the idea of holons. So, a holon is simultaneously both a part and a whole. So, it's a part because it's a part of something bigger than itself, but it's also a whole because, in and of itself, it's complete. The best example would be the cells that make up your body. The cells that make up your body are holons. They are both wholes in and of itself, because if you look at a cell, it's actually very fascinating what goes on inside of a cell, because there is osmosis happening around the cell, and within the cell there is ribosomes, nucleus, things that you probably learned in your 8th and ninth grade science class that I probably can't even recollect at this point of time. But mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. But a cell is also a part. It makes up your body. So the idea is that reality is fundamentally composed of these parts of holons, and that it goes all the way up and it goes all the way down, but it's also going sideways and in diagonal fashion of various sorts in terms of how it interacts with each other. So it's this systemic point of thinking that we are adopting when we are talking about this holonic approach to looking at life. So the reason why holons are so powerful is because when you start to think of reality in the shape of holons, you can start to appreciate the power of holarchies above hierarchies. Because what happens is that when you are talking about a hierarchy, it tends to be in this pyramid sort of fashion where there is a lot of moving parts in the bottom tier, and there is a lot fewer elements at the top tier, and it tends to be finite and it tends to be close ended. But and usually that follows with a power dynamic also, that the elements at the top tend to control the elements at the bottom, or the elements at the bottom tend to very heavily rely on the elements at the top in order to sustain themselves. However, a holarchy is not that. In a holarchy, since it's open ended, it's somewhat infinite in its fashion, and it's not pyramidical in its structure. It tends to be a lot more forgiving when it comes to power dynamics. And that is very crucial in your understanding of life, because if you understand that concept, you will start to appreciate reality in a fashion that is a little bit more encompassing everything else, in the sense that if you think of a company in the form of a hierarchy, you will think of the CEO that sits at the very top, and then the laborers that sit at the very bottom, and tens of hundreds of people that make up the chain of that corporation, that all lie somewhere in between both of those states. But the problem with this form of thinking is that when you adopt that worldview, that worldview is meant to serve the CEO who is sitting at the top and not anybody else. And that becomes pathological, because the CEO then separates himself as someone that can exist by putting the pressure down that pipeline, that chain of being. And when that happens, that CEO usually dismisses everything else but himself. But when we think of it from a hierarchical point of view, we can see that that's actually not the case, because while it's serving the CEO right now, it might not serve him in the longer run, because these finite close-ended loops, they tend to be self-destructive. They tend to consume themselves, because it's not sustainable in no means. And the same can be said with everything else that we are doing, especially when, I don't know if you guys have had the same syllabus as me, but I think in my third grade or fourth grade, we've had science classes where we were introduced to the food chain, and we think of humans as being on top of that food chain. And in a lot of ways, we are. But that does not mean that we can look down upon everything that lies beneath that food chain. Because the moment that we do that and we start treating everything else besides us as an externality that we can live without, that becomes that point of no return, where the damage that we cause will be so severe that there is very little that you can do to rectify it. And this can be seen everywhere, with corporations treating all of their waste into river bodies, and that pollutes the entire city, the state, the oceans, and that affects the marine life that's living there, which affects the fisheries. And then because of that, people tend to overfish. And because of overfishing, now the ecological balance of that system is very much in jeopardy. And because of that, it opens the world to a lot more environmental concerns like climate change, global warming. You know the drill. If you watch any nature documentary, you will know how connected all of our being is, even though you might not fully recognize it. And so, after learning about these holons and holism, the kind of worldview that you adopt with holism, and thinking about reality holistically, I've started to notice gaps in my education. I've started to notice gaps in my understanding. And I think that's what I seek for presently, is pure understanding. That's what I'm most passionate about. And so, in the spirit of that, I decided that I want to invest my time reading this book. which is titled Sex, Ecology, Spirituality by Ken Wilber, who is one of the smartest human beings out there, at least according to people who have consumed his work. And from a slight tease of just reading 25 pages, I can attest to that. This kind of opened up my mind to like various degrees that I never thought possible. Just that 25 pages, and I can't wait to go through with this and explore more. And this is just one book in his collection of works. And this is advanced level stuff. Like, this is as advanced as college level calculus, in my opinion, because not a lot of people would think about these things in the sort of depth that you need to be thinking about these things if we are actually thinking about big picture and long term thinking, which is what we should be doing, because at the end of the day, we need to understand our purpose and how we fit into the bigger picture of life. Because, as I said, the cells that make up your body are holons because they are both a part and a whole in itself. But you, as an individual, are also a holon because you are complete as a person, but you also fit into certain parts of social dynamics. So, for example, I could be a holon in the Indian citizenry. I am a holon of the male species of Homo sapiens. What else am I a holon of? I am a holon of YouTubers who upload videos on YouTube. And you can start to appreciate how much you are actually becoming a part of something, and you start thinking of yourself in a less egotistical fashion, because the more ego that you have and the more ego that you bring into scenarios that don't require it, the more you are ignorant to seeing how you fit into the bigger picture. And when you do that, because of that ignorance actually leads to evil. That is what we call evil. It's nothing but ignorance. I hope you are grokking how profound all of this is. If we fail to recognize how we fit into the bigger picture, then we will most definitely contribute to evil. And it's important to understand what were the events that led us to this exact point of being, also, because nothing is random. Everything has had a certain structure and order to it. Like, have you ever tried asking yourself why science was separated into physics, chemistry, and biology? I mean, you had these subjects in your school, and it kind of made sense to have a fractured view of science where you specify niches within it. But then, who taught you how to put all of them together and make sense of it as a whole? Nobody. I'm sure nobody did. Maybe you've had some holistic college professors who kind of made you aware to this and brought or shed a little bit of light onto it. But for most of you that's listening to it, you never bothered questioning why. Well, before science really took off, there was this notion from Aristotle and Plato, um, where they recognized the great chain of being, where they recognized the web of life and how interconnected everything is, and that we can't pick apart one thing without including everything else, because the moment you do that, you start to unravel the great fabric of the universe. So everything existed because it had a purpose, it had an intent, and it had a reason for its existence. And then came science, the works of Galileo and Kepler and Newton, wherein they started to branch off into the physiosphere, the dealing of matter, with Galileo and Kepler doing planetary motions and Newton combining all of that into his laws of motion. But the thing with that, and I'm sure the scientists did not intend for it to be this way, was that a crucial aspect of the physiosphere was that it was in entropy, that it was dying in and of itself, in the sense that if you had a glass of water and you dropped an ink on it, eventually that ink would disperse and it would disappear into the water. But you never see the opposite happening. You never see the ink gather itself up back into a ball. And so the arrow of time was moving downwards, where things were more organized and it was starting to get lesser and lesser and lesser organized. And then Darwin came along with his theory of evolution, that the beings that we see today were not simply put here at the time of creation, that they evolved from much more simpler states of being, like an amoeba evolving to fish, and fish evolving to mammals, and mammals evolving to us, Homo sapiens. But you never see the opposite happening. You never see an ape evolve into an amoeba. That doesn't happen. It seems quite obvious what I'm saying to you, but it's really not as simple as you would like to imagine it to be. Because the thing is, the arrow of time was moving exactly opposite. It was organizing itself in an upward fashion as time went on. And so, how do you rectify this? How do you reconcile this? The arrow of the physiosphere was moving downwards, where it was getting more organized and more less organized and more chaotic, while the arrow of time of the biosphere was moving in the upward fashion, where it was organizing itself more and more and more to higher states of being. And that kind of fractured science. And there were early attempts to reconcile this fracturing, but none seemed to fix it. Honorable mention would be the noble attempt that Descartes did with his dualism. So you see how complicated this can be. I need you to appreciate how immensely complicated reality is, and to see the divine beauty in how it has structured itself to be the way that it has. None of this is random, everything is by design. And the reason why I've alluded to this is because now that you're aware of this, now that you've become a little bit more conscious of this, we need to ask ourselves, how are we going to design ourselves out of this conundrum that we have created? How can we, because whether we realize it or not, with politics, with government, with everything that goes on in the world, we are constantly trying to put things back in place. That's kind of the express purpose of all of us, is that a house unattended for 2 weeks just gathers dust and then you come there and then you sweep all of the dust so that it can be a lot more organized. And that activity doesn't stop ever. It continues being throughout. And so as we evolve into higher states of being, as our capabilities evolve and transcend past our limitations presently, we need to understand how we can start organizing things in a much more healthier fashion than what we are doing today. As I said, this is truly advanced level stuff. This is not simple. But in order to design our way out of this, we have to think about this in this complicated fashion, because there are no simple solutions. And whatever simple solution that you choose to adopt because you're so desperate for any solution, well, it might resolve that problem temporarily, but it's not going to fix anything permanently. And in fact, that temporary fix that you do will cause further damage down the line, where the permanent solution might become harder to accomplish further still. Yeah, I know. It's quite a lot. And this is just me presenting all of these in the most crude way possible. There is a lot that you can refine from these ideas, and I want you to contemplate on these. Ask yourself this one question, and I think this one question would be quite profound in how you conduct yourself from this moment onwards. Ask yourself, what would my life look like if I decide that from now on, every moment that I spend would be spent towards the highest good of the universe? Because honestly, what life is better lived than the life that you serve the universe? I don't think there are any other ways in which you can live a truly fulfilled life wherein you can fulfill the entire fucking universe, man. And that's universe with a capital U. I'm including all multiverses. Start to take your life seriously. Start to appreciate reality and start to understand how much you are influencing your perception of reality. Start to realize your responsibility in creating that of which you refer to as your reality. Because I'm willing to bet money that you're probably not aware. Not yet. But I wish you clarity. And hopefully, the videos that are going to be released from now on in this channel offer you that clarity. Because as I go through with this journey, I'm recognizing how much of a haze my mind was prior and how much clear it has become. And this clarity opens up your vision to how much more haze you need to shift through in order to actually see reality for what it is. And once you see that, when just like an inkling of it, can see light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a speck You're nowhere close to it, but you know that it's there. Keep moving towards it. You might trip and fall further and further and further in that darkness, but the more you keep pressing on and the more you choose to bear that pain, those injuries, and keep pressing further and not looking back, the more you can come closer and closer and closer towards truth. And it's truly a beautiful thing to experience. And here's the thing, I'm not claiming that I experienced it, but I do see light at the end of the tunnel. And my interest is in guiding you as much as possible by giving you virtue signals that, hey, keep going, man. Keep pressing forward. You're not alone. You're not alone. See how you fit in the bigger picture. See how you are a part of something bigger than you, and you will instantly come to that clarity that all of the feelings of you ever being alone were just clouded judgments because you couldn't see clearly, because you refused to believe that there was light at the end of the tunnel. And I haven't forgotten. I didn't mention that Holons is not the ground, because no matter what you do, the ground is actually groundless. It's your ego trying to construct a ground, an arbitrary ground. But if you dig deep enough, then, well, you will know that there is no ground. But it's difficult for you to recognize that, because if there is no ground, if reality is not grounded in anything, then you would go insane. You would. So then, what is the ground? Well, the ground is whatever you imagine the ground to be. So the ground is really imagination. You can't really get underneath imagination. It's consciousness imagining this moment right now. It's consciousness convincing me that I'm speaking to a mic, talking in front of a camera, being lit. I can choose to ground this, but at the same time, this is not really the true ground. This is just a facade. Recognizing that is also a major part of your development in this journey, because then you can be a lot more open to everything that life has to throw at you. You're not closed minded anymore. Open mind leads to infinity. Reality is infinity. I want you to let that sink in. And I want you to know one last thing. He or she who is most holistic wins the game of life. All right, that's it from me. Philly Wonka is out. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. New episodes will come weekly. That's kind of the intention with this work. As I delve deeper and deeper and get a lot more clarity on things, I can start to bring more and more and more value to you. So, catch you guys next time. Take care until then. Peace.